to see your faces. Please feel free to shift your seating around if it makes it easier to be able to see. So before we start the question and response, this morning, a couple of things that I wanted to say. One is things are shifting quickly with the overall COVID situation. And I want to assure you of something and ask something of you. I want to assure you that we will continue here at Buddha Eye to pay careful attention and to shift as seems appropriate as everything is shifting. We're not out of the woods. We're in a very peculiar place here, being the level of vaccination, etc. This isn't the way it is around the world. It's important for us to remember that. And so we will continue to put our focus both on public health and on personal safety. So the public health side, we change the way we're doing things in the hall according to what the public health guidelines are, but we will continue to create the layering that allows you to participate in a way that feels safe to you. So we'll continue to have seating outside, online seating, and inside. We'll play with the density a little bit. Everyone feels very close, which I am fond of, but that is going to be a process for us feeling through all of that. And things may go back to masks and things at some point. We don't really know. So. So that's what I wanted to assure you about. The thing I want to ask of you is to be very gentle with each other and very bring your part of your being that is trying to be sensitive to others and really just crank that dial up. Everybody's going to work with this in a different way. There are people who have chosen not to be vaccinated, or their life is such that they can't be vaccinated, or they live with people who are very compromised for some reason, and everyone has their own place in this big puzzle of how they're working with it. And so our job as a Sangha is not to be right about anything, right? It's our job to care for each other. And so there's a political place for being right or not being right and fighting about things, and I don't say that's unimportant, but really our core thing as a Sangha is to care for each other. So turn that dial up, like some people like to be hugged, some people don't. Some people don't want to be hugged. They like to be hugged, but they don't want to be hugged right now. I mean, there's all kinds of things there. So if we just turn that up a bit, it would be wonderful. The other thing I wanted to mention is after the last question and response, I had some feedback about the participation in the question and response. The last question and response, every questioner was male. And so I wanted to say a couple things about that. I went back and I listened to that question and response, and then I went back and I listened to a couple question and responses before that. Because we have this wonderful equipment now, we can go back and because I was in a reflective posture, I wanted to say, what's happening here? And I listened to a question period from many Dharma talks, and this was my observation. After a Dharma talk, there's a pretty good mix of people who are asking questions, newer people, longer term people, gender, age, those kinds of things. And that's sometimes true with the question and responses, and sometimes not true. And so I just want to invite people, to ask people to think about your position a little bit when we're in a place where it's a little bit of a free-for-all time, and think about, am I a person who really am shy about coming forward? Am I a person who's always coming forward in those situations? If there's an awkward kind of pause and no one's asking a question, do I feel like I need to fill that? What's my tolerance for how much of that there is, which may be what other people need to step forward, and then certainly to consider the gendered element to it. I'd like to also go into a little more subtle realm there. We have many people in our society and in our Sangha who do not adhere to some rigid definition of maleness or femaleness, and so that's another thing that we need to bring into our awareness. That the world may look a certain way to us because we live within a certain kind of structure, or we're accustomed to doing that. but that's not where everyone is. And we're really blessed to be not ignoring gender and saying, oh, it doesn't matter, but saying the way that we've thought about gender for so long is incredibly limiting and painful. So just a little bit vague there about what I'm asking you to do, but just thinking about your place in the Sangha from many different facets, and then asking a question from there. If you're in the hall, you can ask a question, just put your hands together, say Ejo, or if you're online, you can do that. If you're in outside, please come up to the Engawa, this deck, because we need to point a mic at you to be able to hear your question. And like I always say, questions are one of the most important things we have. And so that's why we don't call it question and answer. I don't want to answer your question. I want to respond to your question as a way for, hopefully, for your path to then unfold in a new way. I mean, it will, of course, right? If you like my answer or don't like my answer, it's not so important, but something will happen. And then where you step from that place will be different than before you asked the question.
Angel?
Uh-huh.
For many years, we were Eugene Zendo. We are now Buddha Temple. What happened and what's different?
It's a better name, don't you think? So we started out as a sitting group. As you know, you were there among those early sitters on Potter Street with Getchen Brox. When I think you started when I was still in high school, maybe. I was living even younger than that, right? And that was the sound isn't coming through somehow.
Usually the questions.
Yeah, the questions. Oh, okay. Questions. Yeah. Okay. Problems. There's some problems with the mic, so I will kind of recapitulate the questions as we go forward. So Myoan was asking about, we used to be Eugene Zendo, now we're Buddha Ai Temple. What gives? Is that yeah? Okay. So we started out as that kind of a sitting group, and it was wonderful. And when I returned to the United States from Japan, I moved to Eugene and started sitting with that group, and over time took some leadership. And we moved here, close to 20 years ago, if not 20 years ago. And we converted the garage, it was about half this size, and we sat there, and we were the Eugene Zendo. And we really functioned as a place for people to come and practice Zazen. That was the main focus. At one point in our growth, we were talking about, well, what do we want to be? What do we want to grow into? Really, what is our goal, or what is our vision? And one thing that we talked a lot about was how the Zendo could feel so limiting, like there was some kind of a barrier around it. And people would come and they would sit a little bit, but mostly they wouldn't stay. The space was small, but also the tenor was like a little bit different. And at that point, one of the things I remember reflecting a lot on was that for me to mature, and for the students of the Eugene Zendo to mature, that we needed to have robust connections through the wall of the temple. That when we started to have this wall come up, that our practice was really small and limited. Not that it necessarily would have to be. You know, there's a way where people can just keep in that path and they learn how to open something up. But I felt like it was really important for us to have become really more part of the community that we're in. And many people here shared that feeling. And so we went through a very intentional shift to saying, how do we evolve from the Eugene Zendo to Buddha Ai Temple? And rather than being a Zendo, which means a hall of Zen, we said we wanted to be a temple, which has Zazen at the center. And so there's been, over these past 10 or 12 years, a lot of work to layer. You know, you can come here any day, early in the morning, and you can sit for long periods of time. Most of you don't do that. I'm not saying that you should do that. But that's here, right? And then we try to have all of these different layers of ways people can connect to the Buddha Dharma. And that's what I see as a temple, is like a mandala. And the temple opens up a sacred space, but that sacred space isn't limited to what's inside the temple. The temple opens up a sacred space in which the sacred space is everywhere. Right? But we rely on the temple for that opening, and it helps us open it up in other places of our lives. Yeah, I think that's the most of it. Now I've given you these instructions about being nice to each other. Don't have to worry too much about it, you know.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
The temple's shifting into kind of a summer mode right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's less of an emphasis on formal practice, and we're more taking up a center of work. And I'm also finding lots of people are really interested in practice right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking about the relationship between home practice and practice at a temple.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, it's just a big exploration for everyone. Where do those meet? What's going on in there?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious what lines of importance and where you find advice for where to kind of push people and where to ask people to be soft with themselves, and where are places of exploration that you feel are important as people explore what it means to practice in community, or what it means to practice on your own with a book, with something, and yeah, where do you see some guidance?
So the most important thing is a line of inquiry.
Question?
Oh, sorry. We're going to have to get shorter questions. I think I can summarize it. Home practice and temple practice. What gives? So I would say for that interplay, that interaction and the exploration, the most important thing is inquiry. Our spiritual path is a path of inquiry. And what I mean by that is that we're always curious. And curiosity not just as a kind of a general thing, but curiosity into what is really deeply important in my life. Like asking me that question, asking myself that question again and again and again. And then as I explore, using the practices that are offered through the tradition to help respond to that question, or to help explore that question. So that's whether we're at the temple or we're at home, that's the same thing. But there's something different about practicing at the temple and practicing at home. There's a different quality. It's not that one is better than the other, right? But a different quality. So I really recommend to people that they spend some time in community practice. You know, you're sitting next to somebody and maybe they're like, they're breathing heavy, or, you know, they're always rustling about, you know, they're going to challenge you in some way. And then what's also going to happen is when you think like, oh, I'm the only one that's experiencing that, and then you're going to be talking with someone and you're going to find, oh, my heart is not, I'm not alone. Actually, that we're all in this. So sometimes we're challenged, sometimes we're supported. And so community practice is really important for that. And that can happen in really interpersonal ways, but it can also happen just through the energy of the tradition, which is maintained so particularly and clearly inside the temple. That will support you and it will challenge you. Right? And that's really good for practice. But depending on the shape of your life, how much does it make sense to come to the temple? That's something that each person, you know, has to explore for themselves. And I would say it can be good to have some like back and forth. So sometimes where you're doing less in one place and more in the other, and then shifting back and forth. If you're a trainee like you are, Genjo, that shift happens in years, right? Like 5-year chunks, like here at the temple all the time. And there's a little swing, you know, we take some time off and we do things like that. But I think for other people, probably more, that swing would be more often. You know? So try it. Make a deal with yourself. Say, oh, I'll come one morning a week to sit zazen at the temple. I'll come on Sunday. And I'll do that for a month and then see how it is. And then next month say, I'm purposely I'm not going to go to the temple at all. And see how that is. It's good. It's good to play with that. Now, and then one of the reasons we need to practice away from the temple is because it's easy for us to think that this is the house of awakening. Like awakening rests within this house. And that's just not the case. It's everywhere and nowhere. So we have to explore that through not being too attached to the form.
Andrew? How does the last question relate to what you said to me many, many years ago when we first started, is you can't do it alone?
Yeah, that part where where a community, a refuge in the Sangha, a refuge in the community of those who are trying to follow the teachings of the Buddha. We have to have that. And I would say particularly people who are attracted to Zen, and particularly people who are attracted to Zen and like to read a lot about Zen, which you're one of those people. You also practice and you also have refuge in a community. There's a tendency for us, because I'm the same way, to have a kind of hardened heart towards our fellow human beings. We might have a very soft heart towards some things, like cats or trees or carrots or something like that, but we tend to have a little bit of a severe heart when it comes to other humans. I know that's true of myself. And so the refuge in the Sangha requires us to see that what I'm seeing with my eyes is just what I'm seeing with my eyes. It's just my perspective. But at the same time, when I look in your eyes and you look in my eyes, somehow our total individual perspective and our total undividability is present at the same time. And we need that to be able to follow the Buddha's teaching. He needed that. So, oh yeah.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
I live with a couple of roommates who I feel like aren't upkeeping the environment we live in, and sometimes are in a rush to get to either the gym or work and kind of walk and slam the doors in a certain manner that kind of makes it really hard to meditate at home. How should I go forward with this? And is this a sort of karma from when I used to exhibit that sort of behavior in the past?
Yeah, that's one of the good ways in. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. Was a guy who got a motorcycle in the neighborhood, and it's so loud, and he's just going, and I'm just like, ugh. Well, I used to have a really loud motorcycle, so I was really angry for a few weeks, and then I remembered how fun my noisy motorcycle. I had a Yamaha 650, which is a one-piston 650, so it's like the bike would jump, which was great. Anyway, so when I hear him go by, I think that. So that's one of the ways in, is to realize, of course people are slamming doors. Of course people are rough with things. That's how we are. And I certainly am rough with things as well that I don't know. So some reflection there can be really good. And the patience that comes with that. One of the perfections, one of the core practices in the Mahayana is the practice of forbearance. The thing that's hard about it is, what's the difference between the kind of patience which is locking things down, and what's the kind of patience which is meeting things and letting them move through? You can study that in meditation. Like if you're just there and they're slamming the doors and you're getting more and more frustrated and your body's getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, then you might say, oh, maybe I'll go for a walk. Or maybe I'll go to, have the wisdom to go to another place, not just get through it. But do that also with understanding of, of the karma that's there. Another thing with the karma might be that you have to talk with them about it. And maybe you have, and maybe they can't hear it. So that karma practice is all there as well. I would also say, especially in the summertime, sit outside. Sit at the park or, down by the river. And that's really great, especially if there's people who walk by sometimes, because it'll challenge you, because your image of yourself will be kind of challenged. You might find that you're an inflation type. Like, you're sitting, you're like, see, people can see me sitting. That's awesome. Or you might be more of a shy type, and you're like, oh, I don't want people seeing me like that, whatever it is. But it's really great in this time to get out from places. Hi.
I'm reading through Kilgan Carlson's pamphlet book and finished the section on rebirth and or how he addresses that. And I was raised in the Catholic tradition, where resurrection of the soul and the whole thing is so important, and you go on after death and da da da. And it's so hard to wrap one's head around the finality of dissolution or or of rebirth being in the moment to moment, because I'm repeating all this karmic stream, or becoming in the womb, re-becoming, and I guess this is an age-old mystery question. I don't know, but and has to do with the letting go of the grasping and the idea of self-identity.
What's the question?
I'm sorry, the self-identity. I guess, can you speak to rebirth?
Yeah. So question, rebirth.
Yeah.
What gives? Just to make it easy. So this is, I think, one of the biggest conundrums or challenges for people as they people living in the West who come across Buddhist teachings, and then we're living, we're receiving those teachings and living our life through them, because it sounds so much like an article of faith. Like someone's just saying, okay, there's rebirth, believe it. That's what it sounds like. And in a way, that's true. That's what a way of thinking or a religious tradition will do. It will say, this is how things are. And so this one's very different than the way many of us were raised to think about death and life and all of those things. So the reason I say that is because I think we should recognize that it's challenging. And one of the reasons we need to recognize that it's challenging is because we are masters at the workaround. We are so masterful at the workaround. Like, oh yeah, but it didn't really mean rebirth. It's kind of like, how could I kind of justify it in a psychological way or some way, and then take out the power of the teaching of rebirth in a fairly literal way. And I think it's important for us to face that teaching. I don't think it's important for us to say, you must believe that to practice Buddhist practices or to receive teachings from Buddhism. It's not a requirement, right? But we should face that is a very clear teaching within Buddhism, is that after the dissolution of our body, that there is another birth, until we're a Buddha. Now, the thing that's very tricky about this, or very subtle in it, is it doesn't mean that I am reborn. Because in Buddhism, there is no independently existing I. There is no, me in here that is going to be reborn. What's happening is that the flow of karma, which I experience day to day as myself, that has continuity. It continues. And that death does not cut it off. That's the basic teaching. That death, the dissolution of the material body, is just one layer of our being. And as that layer of our being dissipates, the other layers of our being continue to go forward. And that's what the teaching of rebirth is about. It's not that there's a me that keeps going, but that there is a flow, which I identify as myself. I call it myself. Why is that important? I think one of the reasons that it's important is because the core teaching within the Mahayana is called the Bodhisattva way. It's called the vow of the Bodhisattva. And the vow of the Bodhisattva is no joke. It says, all beings, in any way that you could conceive of a being, I will awaken with them. I won't go ahead. And so that's what we're saying that we'll do. One time, there's no way one lifetime will be enough. We have to be ready to see the entirety of beings through space and time. And that teaching of rebirth puts us squarely within the humongous conundrum of that vow. And without a really humongous conundrum, we can't keep the inquiry going. We can't keep the spiritual inquiry going. We need that kind of conundrum to force us out of our shells. Anyway, those are just some thoughts.
Angela?
Right?
So, given that there's no permanent abiding self, however rebirth occurs, so when we take the Bodhisattva vow, who's taking?
My delusional self. Yeah. See, this is a really important point. This is the other thing that I think is very subtle and easy for us to confuse. We think that we should try to be good, right? And that being good, or like walking the Bodhisattva path, is to get away from the bad, is to get the delusion out. But what is so miraculous about this teaching is it doesn't ask us to do that. It says, no, actually, your self-clinging is delusion. But that's what you practice with. So we're not trying to deconstruct the self to get away from it or to get past it. We're recognizing that what I'm normally clinging to as a self is delusional. But it's also what I experience. And so that's a kind of invitation. It can seem very negative, like, because we read about this, it's like, oh, it's delusional, and all these things you're experiencing are delusional. But another way we could read the word delusional, or understand the word delusional, is invitation.
Is what?
Yeah. Invitation.
Invitation.
Yeah, delusion's an invitation. Delusion's an invitation to enact something. So it doesn't mean that we want to go around and purposefully be evasive or create problems or something. We don't need to create extra problems. We just do that quite naturally. So, but when we have that, then it gives us a chance for practice, and then practice continues and continues. Yeah. Just a second, we had someone here at the door. Yeah.
A small question,
Sure.
large question. Given the ecological crisis that we face, how would Buddha, what would Buddha tell us to do?
I don't know. Yeah. But one of the stories that I go to when I think about that question is the story of the destruction of the Shakya clan. It was the destruction of the Buddha's family and all he knew. And as the armies came to march upon the Shakya clan, the Buddha went out to meet them. And he went 3 times. And he didn't go the 4th. And the 4th time, all of his kin were killed. And he said, it's the karma. It's not that he didn't try to do anything. He did. But he also, out of 4 times, 3 times he went. And 1 time he said, okay, there's something has to play out here. And one of the reasons I go back to that story again and again is something my Dharma brother used to say. It's kind of an interesting or funny metaphor. He said, you know, you need some play in the handle. Like in a car, like a really fine-tuned sports car is a really, really reactive handle, and they're super easy to crash, right? But for a regular kind of car, if you're driving around, you got to have a little play in the handle, because otherwise the car's too responsive. And I think that relates to the hardened ways in which we think of our own place of rightness in the ecological crisis. And so much becomes like I know this is how this is, I know this is how this is, and so we have to solve it in this way. Almost all becomes a political way of solving it, very rigid lines. But I think if we're really going to deal with the underlying ecological crisis, we have to completely transform our hearts, and we have to transform our communities. And that's not something that can be done by being right. It doesn't mean we shouldn't go out to meet the armies. I mean, we should. But that there's this other part that's equally as important and kind of mysterious. We don't know what to do. So what would the Buddha do in this environment? To go out and stop the armies? I think is a really important question for us all to ask.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
One of the contradictions in Buddhism, it seems to me, and I can't get over this, is that the Buddha is quoted as saying, there is no God, there is no immortal self, and once you die, it's over. And then in to cut the tails, he talks about his rebirths. He remembers it as himself, as a Buddha, turning himself over to a hungry lion and feeding the cubs. So how do we get around that? I mean, is it a hangover from Hinduism?
No, I would say the way I get through it is that I don't agree with the first statement you made. I don't believe the Buddha said that. I think there are some very rationally oriented Western Buddhists who have tried to put those words into the Buddha's mouth, which we all do. I'm not saying that those people are doing that and we're not. We're also putting words in the Buddha's mouth. Or I'm putting words in the Buddha's mouth. But that understanding that the Buddha said that there is no rebirth, it just doesn't line up with all the records we have of the Buddha's teachings, where the Buddha's talking about past lives all the time. So I think that's where that comes from, is that kind of hardened mindset. One of the other things that we can pay attention to in rebirth, and this is also very important, is that many different types of teachings of rebirth entered into the modern Western landscape at the same time, and they're not all the same. Some of them came from gurus that were in a tradition that people might use the term Hinduism for. So there may be a big emphasis on that you have an Atman, you have an eternal self, and that eternal self is like a content of your body, is contained in your body, and that the physicality of your being is just a container, and that your Atman would leave your physical body and go into another physical body. That's not the Buddha's teaching of rebirth. The Buddha's teaching of rebirth is that there is no Atman, but there is a continuity that comes from that river of delusion. It can be very tricky to pull the threads of that apart.
So what is reborn?
So that question already presupposes that there is a thing that is born. There is not a thing that is born. There is only birthing. And that's happening every moment. Our consciousness and this world, which are not separate at all, are in a constant process of birthing and dying. And it's even a little bit too much to call it a process. And so when we think in this concretized way of separate beings, we say, well, what is reborn? But in Buddhism, we will say, we could just say very simply, well, you're reborn, a baby's born. But then underneath that, that doesn't mean that there is this kind of permanent being. So when the Buddha told about his past lives, he was talking about the current, this current of being that had gone on for kalpas, which a kalpa is like the biggest amount of time you could think of, multiplied by the biggest amount of time you could think of. It's just this unfathomable time. Yeah. And so that's what people who are gifted with the insight into their previous lives, the language we use gives us the idea that there is a being that is reborn. It's more like looking through a tunnel and being able to see a really long way. For most of us, it turns sharply and we just can't see what's around the corner. You know, we could think back to when I was a child maybe, but we can't see back farther than that. Those who have the spiritual gift of seeing into their previous lives, it's like being able to see farther down it. There's not a turn in the tunnel. But that tunnel is their life, not there was a being, now there's another being, now there's another being.
Hey Joe.
Hi.
As I've been studying awareness, I've noticed that, at least maybe in the way I'm going about it, it's very similar to kind of psychological awareness that I've been practicing with psychology for a long time. You're not your problems, you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions.
Yeah.
And it kind of helps, but only to a point. So I was just thinking about the limits of awareness and how to transform beyond psychological awareness.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So,
Can you repeat the question?
oh yeah. How to go beyond just the psychological awareness as the methodology of practice. Is there something beyond that? Is that fair characterization?
Sure, yeah, like transformation beyond.
Yeah, transformation. So, so awareness is a very interesting word. We think about awareness as being like a holding our attention on an object of awareness. And in that holding our attention on an object of awareness, we can experience some spaciousness. So when we're just overcome by an emotion, for example, then we're just driven by that emotion. But if we're able to practice some awareness of feeling the emotion, feeling it in our body, for example, then this space emerges where we don't have to be just driven by the emotion, but we can study it more. We can study it more closely.
Yeah, I think I'm finding that space kind of limited. I think that's.
Yeah.
what I'm running into.
So that type of practice, which is very important, one of its limitations is that it always relies on an object of awareness. Right? So we're in a process, people kind of casually use the word mindfulness, and they think to be mindful is to be mindful of an object of awareness. So I'm washing the dishes, and I'm very paying attention to the dishes, or like an emotional state or a physical state. But there is a kind of awareness in which we're not holding on to the object of awareness and trying to pay as close of attention to it as we can, but where the object of awareness is inviting us to release the edges of awareness. So this style of meditation is transformational in a different way. So this is within our school. Oftentimes people use the term the backward step. They say take the backward step that turns the light and shines it backwards. Very kind of enigmatic phrase, but it's just about this, that we're walking around with this light shining forward all the time, and it's shining on objects, right? And if we think about the physical world is an easy way to understand that, but it's actually happening inside of us too, right? I'm shining the light on a mental state. I'm shining the light on a physical state, a memory, whatever it is. And so in this side of practice, it's not that we try to turn the light off, and it's not that we try to get rid of the object. It's that when we encounter the object, we let go. We step back without shutting down awareness. Right? So rather than grabbing each of those things and really caring for it, we say, step back, step back. So we have terms like opening the hand of thought. So you have a thought, you're just opening the hand of thought. And that has to do not only with the kind of tension around a particular thought or experience, but around the object itself, the object of awareness itself. And what you find when you're practicing that way is that the objects will, you don't push them away, but they're just there in that moment. And that's very different than them existing in a field of awareness. This is a subtle teaching, though. So I'd encourage you to come and see me for more instruction. Yeah.